All right, YouTube, we now come to the predictable outcome of the Dutch elections. Wilders' party gained several seats and is now the second largest party in the Netherlands. And somehow, according to the corporate media of the US and the establishment politicians and state media, or state co-opted media of Europe, populism has been dealt some sort of death blow. But they're totally and completely wrong. What we actually see, what they're saying is, oh, he failed to win the election, he failed to become prime minister, therefore he failed totally. What I see is that the establishment, the main party there, led by the now continuing Prime Minister Rutte, has lost significant amounts of support. Their major coalition partner, I guess the labor movement there, lost even more support. Meanwhile, Wilders' party, which was an afterthought, a minor party, has suddenly shot up there, is now the second largest, and gives them a mandate to continue talking about their issues. Even worse, and nobody wants to mention this, even worse for the establishment of the Netherlands. The only reason that their loss wasn't more significant and they weren't at hazard of losing their ability to form a coalition and govern at all is that this same individual, who is still prime minister, had to come out, vigorously condemn Turkish involvement in their elections, and for a few minutes there, sound almost like Geert Wilders himself. He had to come out and echo populism just to maintain his ability to govern in the nation of the Netherlands. That's not a win for the establishment. That's not a loss for populism. Under any other circumstances, nobody would be fooled by the line of, oh, populism is dead because they only increased their support by a third. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's totally senseless. It's not the way that the world works. His party made gains. Now, those people that were saying, oh, he'll be the next prime minister and they're going to sweep the elections and they'll have 100 seats or something. That was pie in the sky optimism from people who were, I guess, significantly overestimating the growth of populism. It takes time. Le Pen has a chance to win. It's still a less than 50-50 chance, but she has the chance there. Wilders had a 0% chance of governing the Netherlands. He had only a minute chance of even getting through it as the largest party, and of course he didn't. But he had an extremely good chance to grow his populist support. He did, and they inclined significantly. This is the case with Front National as well. Watch. If Le Pen does not win, and again, there's a better than 50-50 chance that she doesn't, that Macron becomes the next prime minister. If she loses, the state media in Europe, because all major media outlets there are state-run or state co-opted, they're basically communists, they'll come out and say, oh, it's been dealt a death blow. Despite the fact that Front National will have gone from having a quarter of the vote share to probably having more than 40% on a second ballot, with Le Pen actually coming in first on the first ballot. But despite that, they'll declare Front National dead, which is completely stupid. Next time around, if everything remains the same, as it very well might, because the establishment parties in both of these nations will never tackle the problems that are driving the growth of populism, nativism, nationalism, and paleoconservatism to begin with. If all else remains the same, Le Pen will win the next election after this one. That would be a guarantee. It would take a significant seismic shift. French domestic policy would have to essentially adopt everything Le Pen is saying just to stave off the growth of a party espousing the same beliefs. Essentially, she wins without winning. That's the only other opportunity they would have, or they ban the party, leading to civil war or something. Within the Netherlands, Wilders will at least have the largest party the next time around, all else remaining equal, which doesn't always, but, if things move in one direction, they could just as easily move in the other at some other point. At the very least, his party would be the largest. I still think it's unlikely he'd be able to form a large enough coalition to govern, but they would still be in that commanding position. As it stands just now, if we look around Europe today, we have, more than five, but we'll name five major points in which populism and nationalism have already basically won. We have UKIP, a second-tier party in the UK, that nonetheless manages to cause absolute chaos among the conservatives there, while also overseeing the utter crippling of the Labour movement and the splitting off of Scotland into basically SNP territory, leading to a Brexit. that nobody expected would happen even half a decade ago. They never expected it to pass. It did. And the Queen has just signed off on that, by the way, which is sort of a vestigial monarchist trait, but it's kind of cute, I suppose, to have the Queen sign off on the Brexit deal. So that will happen. Now, the UK will be leaving the EU and renegotiating its stance with them. That's death knell number one. Death knell number two is that Wilders in the Netherlands grows what had been a third-tier party into the second largest party in the Netherlands, increasing their representation by a third in an election where, until a year ago, probably people had thought it was a joke, honestly. In France, Front National is now probably going to win on the first ballot. The fact that they won't crescendo over 50% means that on the second ballot, she's at major hazard to lose anyway. But it's still a major statement of the fortitude of populism and nationalism in France. They're further ahead than the Netherlands. They're arguably further ahead than the UK as well. We see the direction in which these things are going. In Austria, a party that never had significant support almost pulled off a win there with Hofer. That's a party, it's a neo-Teutonic party adapted from a literal national socialist movement or post-national socialist movement rather, nationalist movement at large, that before was a mere blip and now came in a very close second in their elections there twice in a row. They had to recount it because of shenanigans going on. Then we would look at the Visegrad group, Poland and Slovakia and the Czech Republic and Hungary, that are getting increasingly concerned about Merkelism there. Oh, actually, number 6 would be the Five-Star Movement in Italy. They've gained more momentum as well. Now, of course, the population there defeated a referendum which would have permanently locked them into establishment politics. It was a last desperate gamble to essentially devolve away from a representative republic, to devolve away from a system of government that's been in swing there for a very, very long time and is very near and dear to people living in Italy. They attempted to do away with that and form essentially an oligarchic system. They attempted to destroy their own representative system of government to preserve their membership in the EU and the presence of economic socialism twain with extreme far-left movements there. And they lost, in Italy of all places. So, if you look at Europe today, populism has not been dealt a death blow. They said that after Hofer lost in a fairly close election. The first time around, he loses by a very slim margin. And remember, being the leader of a party that was not taken seriously until relatively recently. Front National goes from, the last time around, a quarter of the vote share, now to a position in which it is very likely that Le Pen wins on the first ballot. She probably carries the day there. It goes into a second ballot. She may or may not win there. The odds are higher that she loses, but to even make it to that position would not have been possible half a decade ago. Populism is still rising, and here's the central principle. The conditions that are leading to the rise of nativists, populists, and nationalist movements across Europe, the conditions regarding refugees, immigration as a whole, the problems with the centrality of the EU, social alienation as the result of attempts to censor even, center-right movements in Europe, around Europe. Those are not going away. Those will remain in sway and continue to cause the growth of such movements. In most of these nations, I wouldn't be surprised if the next time they hold an election, all of these groups win. Austria will become a nationalist state. Italy will become a nativist state. France will become a populist state along with the UK. The Netherlands will fall to populism light, which is what Wilders represents. They're trying to cast him off as similar to Donald Trump. A little bit. He's a little bit further right than Donald Trump, I think, honestly, on the nativist question. But he's not Adolf Hitler. He's not an extremist. They're trying to cast off Le Pen and Nigel Farage, all these other people, as radicals. Their policy proposals would have been considered not only mainstream, but common sense 50 years ago in Europe. It's only in the latent, dying stages of the EU that things have gotten so warped and so fucked up by idiots like Hollande and Merkel, who congratulated Rudd on his fantastic loss of support within his own country because he managed to stay on as prime minister. It's only because of the problems they're creating that populism and nativism and nationalism are even seen as relevant. These wouldn't be questions people were asking if they had just continued doing business the way Europe has done business for 1,000 years. It's unnatural to the European people to be displaced by foreign groups while being abused by tyrants domestically that tell them to sit down and shut up. It's especially with the French, I would say. It must piss them off more than it pisses off any other group within Europe. So if the UK can have a Brexit, if Austria can almost go for a latent Teutonic movement, if the Swedish Democrats, in Sweden nonetheless, can gain support and rise up towards major party status, the French can certainly pull it off. My suggestion to people who want to see Europe liberated is to immediately begin pushing Le Pen with all your might, whether you're French or not. Brush up on your French skills, make some memes, and do it continuously until there are elections there. Don't wait like you did with Wilders. He probably would have gained a few extra seats if you had just been more involved with memes. But more people speak French probably online than speak, this sort of Dutch lingo, which I don't understand it myself. I know some of the colors and a few things like that. Beyond that, I'm like, Dutch, yeah, it's a cute language. I have no clue what you're saying. With French, it's a little more generally understood. There are plenty of people here in the U.S. who understand how to speak French. My own skills in French are mediocre. I'm certainly not fully fluent in the language of France. Better at reading and writing it than I am speaking or understanding it. Someone speaks to me in French, unless they slow down like I'm mentally retarded or something, I'm not going to really understand what they say unless it's very simplistic. If I'm reading it, I can get the gist much more easily. Got to brush up on my vocab though still. But that would be my suggestion, because if you do that, Le Pen could end up winning on that second ballot. I mean, her opponent's a communist, basically. So, yeah, basically, we already see a situation. This is funny. It's the same, really, in some of these other states. Increasingly, it's the centrist parties that are collapsing. This is what happened in the Netherlands, it seems. The center collapses, and you end up with the right and the left. It's exactly what happened before the rise of Nazi Germany. When the communists and the Nazis became the major parties, the centrist movements basically died out and had to bend knee. That's what's happening in France. Now, Le Pen and Front National aren't far right. They're sort of center right, but because of the way that the paradigm shift occurred previously, people see it as far right. In reality, what they're arguing for is just the human norm. They're saying, oh yeah, we need more border control. We're kind of tired of all the bureaucracy. We sort of want to be more free. We want to be able to trade without groups outside of the EU. Those aren't far-right positions. Those are common sense positions. They're also positions that are held in the majority of the states that are donating these migrants to Europe. Again, you think the Pakistanis would be very receptive to having, 10 million European atheists move in and start demanding equal rights. It would never happen. There would be no reform movement. There'd be a bloodbath. That's what you're looking at in most parts of the world. Europe is under no onus to tolerate groups that won't assimilate into European culture. It's under no onus whatsoever. There is no moral setting under which you should be required to do that. No nation should. Regardless of how small or how large what its racial or ethnic composition is, no people should have to deal with people coming into their state at the request of their government and then refusing to follow their laws and amalgamate at least slightly into their culture. Cuisine and Creole language systems aside, those are just fine. We have those here. Makes the food better. But if those groups refuse to follow the basic rudiments of the human order that's been established, that leads to problems. And it inevitably leads to wedge issue politics. People blaming the populist movements, oh, you're constantly talking about immigrants and migrants and stuff, so there's something wrong with you. That's prefaced on wedge issue-based politicking from the far left in Europe that made it an issue of you are a bigot if you oppose this situation. They started the mess. Populism and nativism and nationalist movements are simply reacting to stress put upon the native populations of these European states by the far left, by the multiculturalists. That's the origin of the problem. Not populism, not nationalism, which was never really present for decades and decades and decades. Nobody joined a populist movement. There was no reason to. If they were a worker who felt disaffected, they joined a labor movement. Labor is now collapsing all over the place. We see it in the Netherlands. We certainly saw it in the UK. And it's going to friggin' continue to collapse. We're seeing it here. The sort of center-left parties within the Democratic core are collapsing right now. A lot of their former fans voted for Trump in the Rust Belt. They did that for a reason. Their support has collapsed here, too. It's going to continue. That central issue is not going to be addressed by Merkel, or Hollande, or Rutte, or any of these other people. The David Camerons and other assorted centrists of Europe will never address the issue. They'll tip their hat to it. Merkel will say, oh yeah, I think maybe we should ban the burqa. And she'll never do it. And she's only doing that to soften up the support of her adversaries by proclaiming populist values. It's exactly what Rutte did over in the Netherlands in order to maintain some degree of credibility with a lot of people who probably last minute would have defected to populism had he not done so. He was forced, his hand was forced in that situation. He probably privately apologized to the Turkish ministers and to Erdogan himself, by the way. He probably immediately called him and said, I had to do this for the election, you understand, of course. Otherwise, you'll have to deal with actual populists. Haha, no, don't worry, send more migrants, by the way. Send more Syrian refugees here. We need, we've got a couple empty buildings in Amsterdam, something like that. That's about all. Peace out.